Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild DevOps Tool Chain. Today we'll be talking to Michael Martinez all about a day in the life with DevOps. If you don't know, Michael is a DevOps manager and lead at a DevOps team responsible for Stoplight and SmartBear's platform products. So he leans on previous experience as an SDAT and a full stack developer. So he knows the full pipeline, and he brings focus on automation to all aspects of the development and release cycle. You don't want to miss this episode. Check it out. Hey, before we get into it, do you know that you can elevate your entire DevOps testing process with tools designed for you to do more, better, and faster? Manage, automate, and execute all your tests all in one place. A simpler way to guarantee app quality. Check out SmartBear's Test Hub and say goodbye to your DevOps blind spots by using it for better test coverage, scale your automation, boost release confidence, and more. Head on over to testskill.me/test hub or use the link down below. Hey, Michael, welcome to the Guild.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Awesome to have you. So you have quite a background. So I'm just curious, just to kick it off first, how you even got into DevOps?
So I started as a full stack engineer, started my career as a full stack engineer at a really big company where, pretty much the deployment process was, packing everything into a jar file and sending it off to India and, crossing your fingers, I guess. Kind of moved into more of the startup space after that. I moved into a role as a test SDAT where it was at a 10-person company and kind of wore a lot of hats there. Really saw my role as a more of a expansive role, not just, writing tests, but really understanding where testing fit in the pipeline, how that fits in the deployment process, through a series of, right sizings and things like that. I kind of ended up being the last developer left. So I became responsible for the whole thing. Wow. The whole deployment process from start to finish, building out all the ephemeral environments. And, that was I was really responsible for all the automation there. Kind of similar thing happened at the next company, and kind of here at Stoplight, I've had the opportunity to kind of grow and have that more formally recognized. And I've been leading the DevOps team here at Stoplight for the last 2.5 years. And we're still alive and kicking. So pretty great.
Nice. So what's it like to lead after first being thrown into it, probably with no experience, and now you're leading one? What was the transition like?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I mean, I feel like I've, kind of always taken on a lot of responsibility. But it was it was interesting to kind of have that role more formalized and have be more, have more formal meetings with stakeholders across the company, right? Whereas before it was everything was a fire. Everyone needed everything, and is okay, now we have more formal, formalize the processes for triaging things, for collaborating and really being able to build out those long-term plans and projects with stakeholders across the organization.
Nice. Because once again, it sounds like you were kind of thrust into DevOps to own it. Is there one thing you wish you knew before that happened, other than you knew this was going to happen?
I mean, I think it's the main thing is stay calm, right?
Yeah, right.
It's when everyone thinks everything's a fire, and sometimes things are a fire, right? But I feel it's really I feel I've always had one thing that I think I've always been good at is having empathy with all our stakeholders. So, understanding where they're coming from, but also not letting that, kind of trigger your immediate reflexes of hey, it's hey, all right, let's take a time to step back. Let's take a breath and let's see what we need from each other here. So, yep.
Love it. So, I want to give this almost like a starter kit for people to get up to speed with DevOps. So I want to go over some main principles and get your views on it. Because a lot of people that listen to this have your background as an SDAT and then got into DevOps, or maybe they're thinking about switching careers or switching roles. So what are some of the main principles of DevOps? I guess collaboration would be one of them. Automation, continuous improvement, customer-centric action. Maybe we could talk about each one of these.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that's really important, or one of the really foundational principles for sure is collaboration, right? As I kind of touched on a little earlier. In DevOps, like you're working with stakeholders across the organization, both internal and external as well, right? We have responsibilities to our customers who are like the developers, of course. But we have SLAs, like especially for uptime, right? With our, our customers outside, infrastructure issues, tickets come through. So yeah, so we have to like really collaborate with the, and we need to help, developers meet their goals as well, right? So having really good tight connections, like, and really good, like, even especially personal relationships with folks across the organization to make it, easy to communicate and, and bring up our concerns, like, is really important to the success of any DevOps organization. I feel like we don't operate in a silo. You can't just throw things over the fence. That's like one of the main, like, we need to work together to accomplish these goals as a whole.
Nice. So I guess you had another wrench thrown your way. You got into DevOps, and then you were acquired by SmartBear?
We were acquired by SmartBear. Yep.
So how did that affect collaboration then? Did you have your own processes, and now you're like, oh my gosh, no, I need to collaborate against this large organizations with all these silos now? How does that work?
It's a lot different, right? Like going back to like the small company where these relationships we built, it's like you have to relearn, or you have to learn like the new organization structure, the new, when you're a startup and like you're the only DevOps team, you're very empowered, right? Like we had the keys to the kingdom, right? And now here we're like one piece of the bigger whole. So really like, negotiating that and like figuring out like ownership across there. But I think like one thing that we really have done well in that acquisition is bring the energy that we've had like as a startup, right, at Stoplight, to inject that into the larger organization as well, kind of like leading by example and like really digging into their processes as well, and like helping bring an automation mindset to their stuff too, and really breaking down those barriers, or working more to break down those like silos that sometimes exist, especially in like larger organizations. It's like, who do I talk to about this? Like, well, we'll see.
Right. Absolutely. So I love it how you said automation mindset. What does automation play in the principles of DevOps? Most people think of just functional automation. They miss out on other automation. What is an automation mindset?
Yeah, I think it's like, like especially with DevOps and especially traditional ops, right? There's a lot of like manual operations and requests that come through, right? I think a lot of it is like thinking, through processes, and requests that come through, and like being critical about what comes, and like thinking about how we can better improve the process and how we can better improve, like from a technical standpoint, but also from, a higher organizational standpoint too, right? Like, for example, like, we have, sometimes there are manual database requests that come through, right? And if it becomes a pattern, after the second or third one, we kind of bring it up, to the developers and like the product folks, see if we can productize that. But, that takes its own timeline, right? So then internally, we work on creating tools to make that, more seamless, right? Like, create like automate Jira tickets that come through that can we can use and have our, automation on the other side where we can, process those requests like in a consistent and repeatable manner. Cause, those are dangerous and we don't want those. We want to make them as safe as possible, right? So.
How do you get buy-in? Like a developer probably has a large backlog, definitions of done they need to get done. Now you're like, oh, can you automate this database script or something? Do you get a lot of pushback, or is it more just like you said, collaboration, trying to educate?
Data helps.
Yeah, right.
Data helps. Right. Yeah. So exactly. Like, usually it's like collecting the number of tickets and like the time that we've spent on this manual task. Also showing that we've, done work on our end to improve it, that we're not just kind of like throwing things over the fence ourselves as well. Right. But also, putting together the data and, showing like what it's actually costing our team, but also the organization, at large. Right. I think that's like, And yeah, I think like, yeah, coming from a place of empathy, right? Understanding that they have their own backlog, as you mentioned, and we have our own backlog. And, like working together to have like, things in the interim, like, short-term fixes that we can have, medium term, and like, the long-term goal that we're working towards together to kind of bring that all together.
Absolutely. Just in my experience, I find a lot of times when people have a process in place, they hold tight to it. Maybe because I come from a regulated environment, but I know one of the key principles of DevOps is continuous improvement. So I assume you had a certain system when you were a startup, and then you're part of this larger team now. So how do you work in continuous improvement to learn like what works and what doesn't work, specific to your specific organization, what's going on there?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I think the first part was like understanding where, like they're coming from and where we're coming from, right? No process is perfect and everyone has a reason for, whatever process they have, right? So like, being flexible is a really big important part, right? Like, as you said, people hold things like near and dear to their heart, but really nothing is sacred, right? Like, like really like, and taking a critical eye towards everything, right? Our own process is included as well, right? So especially like being part of like, this larger organization at SmartBear, there have been more, I guess, metrics like from like the product management perspective, I guess, that they manage and like that like from the SmartBear side, like there's a whole organization that monitors like project metrics, I guess. Whereas like in a startup, it's like, hey, did we get it done? Like,
Right.
They're like, yes or no, right? And we had our own pointing system and things like that. So like kind of like, working together with like the stakeholders there, right, to understand what they needed from us, right? And like, what they needed from us and like what boxes needed to be ticked and like, how like, so that we weren't outliers in the whole organization, but also like, making it a process that we felt worked for ourselves as well. And that we can kind of bring to other folks too. Especially, like for example, yeah, like the pointing, we use story points, on our team, right, to like take risk and other things, risk and like effort into consideration. Whereas like, previously the organization was tracking like hours and like just time to action. So like kind of like, bringing that kind of mindset and explaining to other stakeholders like why we use this and like how, we feel that better, most accurately shows like the actual work that was done or, the projected, work that can be done, coming up.
Awesome. So, I guess the last principle is customer centric action. Does this also have to do with internal? Because it seems like you're very internal as well with customers, your developers, your product owners, and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, especially for ourselves, like our team has a very unique, or I think DevOps in general, like has a very unique place within the organization where we have, two kinds of customers, like the internal customers and the external customers as well. Right. So like, whereas like other parts of the org are really external focused, right? We are as well, right? Our team is responsible for uptime and incidents response and monitoring and all the infrastructure that goes along with that, right? So we have to keep those SLAs and like those objectives. But also we're responsible for the pipeline, right? We're responsible for infrastructure internally as well, right? So it's like making sure everything is running for our developers, making sure that the developer experience is seamless, making sure that code can go out, we're deploying, I think like at the peak of our development, we were deploying like almost 10 times a day, right? Making sure that the pipeline is clean, like having everything going out, like, and changes like, like smoothly. So, we need to work internally with the devs as well as like, making sure that like our commitments are kept to our customers as well outside the company. Yeah.
So how do you get to that velocity of having not only releasing quickly, but having confidence in releasing it that quickly?
I think, I think like it's making sure that the process is repeatable and that every step of the process is, or like especially every environment is as close to production as possible, right? When I originally came in here as an SDAT, for example, like our testing, or we were using or so we deploy, using Kubernetes and Helm, right? But we were using Circle CI's, like kind of like zombie Docker container kind of situation to create a weird ephemeral environment. And we were having a lot of issues like with tests not, or, regressions making it to production because like those things didn't match, right? So we revamped that. We use the same Helm charts, like just different values files, and like in like very similar environments. We made sure that bring everything to infrastructure as code, right? So like that we can see like just looking at the code that everything is like as similar as to production as possible. Bring in as much automated testing as we can, and making rollbacks like as simple and as possible, right? So if we find a regression that we can, we're confident that we can roll that back easy, and then also knowing that and like and socializing that so like that the developers like are comfortable and confident in deploying to production, right? Which all it does is take a merge, right? Like letting them know like you open a PR is like if that all those tests are green, you're good to merge, and then it's good out in the wild, and that's okay.
Right.
But yeah.
Awesome. So how about uptime? Like when does DevOps end and SREs begin? Do you use SREs, or are you responsible for the pipeline uptime? Sounds like you're definitely responsible for provisioning and maintaining infrastructure. Like how do you handle uptime?
Yeah, so we're responsible for we're like also SRE, like for the SRE role as well. So like we're responsible for uptime. We have an on-call rotation that we've actually gotten developer buy-in into. So like, it is our job to keep things up, but like we have like gotten buy-in from the devs as well to like, have like that kind of shared responsibility, right? So like we're on the escalation rotation, but also like triaging like is kind of a shared responsibility across like a lot of the organization. And I think that's something that's, really great about the culture that we've built here at Stoplight, that like, it's not, again, going back to collaboration, right? It's understanding and like building that kind of like shared ownership, where, we own the infrastructure, but like we're also, here to help each other. So
do you have any advice for triaging to make life easier, or any steps or procedures you follow?
So for triaging, I mean, having a run book, obviously, like documenting, like obviously, yeah, and like making sure we have different levels of like alerts, right? We have alerts that could be kind of like more like yellow lights, right? Like our lower priority alerts. But we also have like a separate set of like definitely like everything's on fire, like drop everything, like alerts. So being and like socializing and documenting that, I think, and having that in an easy space has really helped us be able to like have like, especially devs who are not as confident with the infrastructure, kind of like take on that triaging role, and knowing that we're going to be here to escalate as well, right? Like that we're on our own rotation and there's a safety net, right?
Right.
So that's good.
Awesome. So do you have any favorite DevOps tools that you think everyone should be using, or that you find really helpful? Any of the DevOps pipeline issues? One of our projects was moving into Datadog. I feel like Datadog has been really great for monitoring, for monitoring. And, obviously it's one of those tools where they make it really easy to spend a lot of money. Like, I feel like that's part of like the management job that you don't really hear, like, or, like that wasn't like, I guess, clear too at the not clear, but it's like, before it's like, oh yeah, like we just provision a lot of things. And it's like, now like the bill comes and you're like, why did you spend this money? It's like, oh snap. It's been great to have like a centralized location for like all our monitoring and logging, and being able to like cross-reference that. I feel like that's been really great for us. I mean, using some of the more modern CI/CD tools, like, my first couple jobs, we use Jenkins. Like here, we use Circle CI and GitHub Actions. I really like, that, those are more flexible. You can have more directed, like acyclic graph kind of, like workflows, which is nice. And it's, and there's a lot of integrations with like the other tools that we use already, like that are native, and they have their own runners that can, run in your
in your infrastructure, so you don't have to worry about firewall stuff as much. So those have been some pretty good, tools that we've used here. Cloudflare, we use Cloudflare as our WAF, which has been pretty nice.
Nice. Yep.
Yeah. So.
All right, so this probably isn't controversial anymore, but there was a movement to start calling DevOps DevSecOps. How much responsibility do you have leading a team with security? Do you have like a separate security team, or is that something you really think you need to encourage people to have DevSecOps as part of the whole?
I guess there's like all the dev FinOps, dev, like all sorts, right? Like all the ops. And I think like for us, like it really depended on the size of the organization, right? Like at Stoplight, when we were just a startup, my team was responsible. Like, we took a lot of like the responsibility for, getting us up to, ready for a SOC 2 audit, right? And getting our SOC 2 certification. We did a lot of that. We stood up the infrastructure. Like we were answering a lot of like those security questions that came through, right? But the second we got acquired by SmartBear, there's a security team. So it's like, like there's a whole organization dedicated to that. And, on one hand, like we're responsible for the implementation of like whatever security things come up, right? But like again, like anything else, the responsibility is always just shared, right? In a different way, right? So, if they have their, the kind of like like the agents that run, that run on our infrastructure, that they run typically on their infrastructure, they open a ticket with us, we created, and, instead of it coming from us, like that, hey, we need to run this certain thing, which we had our own kind of like security agents, agents that we're running, they have their own flavor, and that comes to us and we do the implementation side, but it's still a conversation back and forth. Right. So, we still do a little bit, but yeah, I think it really, on that, it kind of depends on the way your organization is structured and how, like how you want to share those responsibilities.
Gotcha. So do you have security built into your DevOps pipeline when someone checks in code, maybe it kicks off or anything like that? High level kind of sanity checks.
We do some and also like we have like our we have like automation around like making sure our dependencies are okay. We have code coverage, security, like code analysis in that front as well. We also have I guess like now that it's been handed off, I'm not sure, but we had like contracts with some vendors who would do like regular pen testing and things like that. Yeah, and I'm sure the security team has their own stuff right there as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Nice. So every time I look at DevOps online, I see images. I always see the DevOps lifecycle: discover, plan, build, test, deploy. The whole thing: operate, observe, continuous feedback. Like as a beginner, I've never done DevOps. I've been an automation engineer all my life.
Where?
How much do you spend on each of these steps? Is it really this discrete, or is it just like in the day in the life, how much do you spend on each of those little segments in that little, figure eight?
Yeah. I mean, it really depends, on the day. Right. But like, for example, like, we work we work in an agile framework, right? Like develop it and cycle. So like, for example, every 2 weeks we have our sprint rituals where we do like a lot of the planning, right? Where we do, grooming, planning, things of that sort. We do our retro, right? So like, kind of like, that's kind of like the feedback part of it, right? So like that, there's dedicated time for that. Ideally, like deploying and testing is kind of like automated, but we're always like building. We're also always building improvements to that as well, right? Building improvements to our automation, like and that test integration as well. And operate and observability, like building, again with going back to the automation mindset, like making sure that our observability tools are up to scratch and like that we have processes in place there, and like for operations that that there's flexibility, like high availability, like that our infrastructure is already designed right to like be flexible with those things. So it really depends on the day and the week and what's going on, but like ideally we do spend a lot of time on the building, so that the other parts can kind of like flow naturally and flow back to that, and we can iterate on that again. So,
yes. this is probably a dumb question. So back in the day, my company's like, oh, we're going to do DevOps. But they didn't focus on deployment. So we had to do manual steps before tests kicked off in all the environments. So it wasn't built to be deployable. So it was kind of stupid. Is that still an issue? Do people automatically build it to be deployable? Do you ever have to say, you have to build an API or a hook or something to be able to get this to run seamlessly?
I mean, yeah, I've seen I've actually kind of been surprised, like sometimes, like by how common it is that people don't just like automatically deploy, like that there's not as much automation. There's still like a lot of manual release processes out in the world. And I think like for us, like, when we see that, we try to address that and make it, empower the devs, right? Empower, like create a process, like, to empower developers to kind of deploy their code and also educate. Cause I think one of the main reasons, when we came to SmartBear, one of the things that we saw were some teams weren't deploying or they didn't automate their pipelines, their releases because they did not, or they didn't think that that was compliant with SOC 2 regulation, like the SOC 2 certification. But we had done that in a SOC 2 compliant way. And so kind of like educating them and bringing that as well. And educating like our SmartBear counterparts, right, and like bringing them up to scratch, like with those, letting them know that it can be a fully automated process has been good. So I think that's the goal, and like that's what we strive. And like I personally, like here and wherever I go, in the future, like that's kind of like the first thing I that you see that needs sometimes needs to be fixed for sure.
Absolutely. All right. So speaking of future, let's put on your little psychic hat here. I'm asking everyone this. Obviously, AI has been a big deal. And I guess it's almost impossible to know, but just because you're part of a larger company now that probably has a lot of different customers, a lot of verticals, you probably see things a lot of people don't. Where do you see like DevOps heading in the next 5 years? And how much of AI is in play, or how much is it going to change things, do you think?
I don't know. I like personally see AI as more of a tool, right? Like I know some people get afraid or it's like, oh, it's a replacement. But like we're for even now we're using kind of like we are using AI in our normal job, right? We have licenses for GitHub Copilot, right? And like that helps like make a lot of like the simple things, like you have like a Terraform template or something, and it's like, oh, okay, here these are the basic parts instead of like having to go look at the documentation. So I see like AI like as like helping us like build better tools to like empower our developers going forward. I don't think it's necessarily the end all be all. I think it's like anything else. It's like, also, especially it's like a lot of trust but verify, right?
Yep, right.
But yeah, I feel like it's, like with that, I know like Amazon has tools to like, kind of like help like with cost and like efficiency and things like that. So like, I think like, we'll see a lot of like AI empowered, kind of development going forward. But I think it'll kind of speed us up, but not, I mean, I might eat my words in 5 years, but not replace us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Michael, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give to someone to help them with their DevOps efforts? And what's the best way to find or contact you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, to help with the DevOps effort, I think it's like just collaboration, I think, is one of like the things, and empathy, like have empathy with your stakeholders. Like don't be afraid, to reach out to people and like, and work together, I guess. Like it's not a silo, it's a group effort. And I think like that's a good guiding principle that I've used that I think has like really helped a lot. Yeah. But yeah, I have a LinkedIn, I think, that I sent, I can be reached there. And yeah, I think like that would probably be the best way to reach me.
And for links of everything of value we covered in this DevOps Toolchain show, head on over to testguild.com/P155. So that's it for this episode of the DevOps Toolchain show. I'm Joe. My mission is to help you succeed creating end-to-end full-stack DevOps toolchain awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.